Welcome to Window Dressing's Gothic Romance series. I'm Madeline Jane Auble. This week, I talk about the 1945 adaptation of Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, originally published in 1890. The story is as classic as a fairy tale or fable. The film features Angela Lansbury in her second film role, following her debut in the topic of the last episode in this series, Gaslight. She plays Sybil Vain in Dorian Gray, a kind of Snow White type, minus the aid of woodland creatures. She is remarkable in this movie and becomes the most memorable part of the film, except for the special effects that use color in an otherwise black and white film to depict the horrific changes to Dorian Gray's soul. Donna Reed plays Gladys Hallard, another Snow White type, but of the more advantaged variety, one with the grace of a family name and the incorruptible innocence afforded to societally valued women. The fewer options a woman has, the more likely she is to choose survival over socially decreed morality. She is also more susceptible to becoming prey for the sport of those more optioned gentlemen who come a-calling. The other players include Dorian Gray, played by Hurd Hatfield, Lord Henry, played by George Saunders, and Basil Hallward, played by Lowell Gilmore. Basil is Gladys's uncle. Dorian is a young, wealthy gentleman who has his portrait painted by Basil, an established artist and a discerning but non-judgmental man. Under the corrupting influence of Lord Henry, Dorian makes a wish that is more like a deal with the devil. A statue of a cat seems to be the object d'art that connects Adrian's thought with the devil's will. Lord Henry is a devil's helper type, whom I would call the devil himself if I hadn't known this type of person in my life. The kind who talks a big talk but is actually just hiding behind immorality to avoid the force of their own emotions. He is a coward and a liar. Dorian is the one who ultimately embodies something more than a mortal evil. Basil gives his completed portrait to Dorian. His explanation for gifting the painting rather than showing the work is simply that there is something odd about it. This later expands to it having a life of its own. The painting takes on the proof of Dorian's sins and the passage of time. His flesh and blood face remains perfect and young, allowing him to live without visible consequences. The costumes are designed by Irene, who did the costumes for Gaslight. The hair and makeup department also deserve a significant amount of credit. The towering Gibson girl coiffs Donna Reed dons, along with Angela Lansbury's softly glowing curls under her dead bird-adorned hat, create a hauntingly vivid impression of the women in this film. As for the men, Dorian's beauty takes on a sickly sweet taste as the clarity of his youth is tarnished only on oil and canvas. As for Basil, the artist who painted the portrait of Dorian, he ages normally, without virtue signaling or cruel remnants of sin on his face. The devil's unwitting yet eager helper, through reckless talk and unending interest in surface-level pursuits, Lord Henry, ages like any fading playboy. His wild notions sound intellectual to unquestioning souls, but are really void of thought, as is anything that separates one from the soul. He encourages Dorian to pursue only what feels good to him in the moment, making an unfortunate but indelible impact on the young and highly impressionable Dorian. Following Lord Henry's advice, Dorian finds himself in a rather seedy saloon called the Two Turtles. But rather than being taken over by sin, the light of love graces his life. he meets Sybil Vain, Angela Lansbury's character. She is a singer and a beautiful one. That first night, she floats down from the stage and sings throughout the floor where the audience sits in awe of her. She is wearing a small, stiff-brimmed hat adorned with a bird. Her hair glows the most lovely shade of pale blonde under the bird-topped hat. I know it's blonde because the light passes through it, giving it a glow that light brown or strawberry hair does not have in black and white film. She wears a jacketed frock with a modest gathered bustle in the back, delicate Victorian boots, and a muff for her hands. The jacket's collar is adorned with fur that matches her muff. She is followed by a footman type who throws fake snow in the form of large confetti paper as she performs. The snow gives the effect of rice being thrown after a wedding, only she walks alone, without a groom. She sings, "Goodbye, little yellow bird, I'd rather brave the cold." She is so sweet and innocent in the otherwise tawdry space that she charms every man in the room, but especially the one so-called gentleman, Dorian. He looks on as she glides across the floor, singing this simple song about a gilded cage, and he decides that he wants to trap her in a similar prison. The song's lyrics specifically lay out what is going to happen to her. She sings, "Her liberty for gold could not be sold. Stay with me, my little dearie, for without you it would be dreary." When she reaches Dorian, she makes eye contact with him and a look of fear crosses her face. The way women look right before they fall in love with a monster. Angela Lansbury references her rendition of Little Yellow Bird in the 1984 television series Murder, She Wrote. Jessica Fletcher has a cousin named Emma, a twin cousin who is an old vaudevillian with a Cockney accent and a passion for stage makeup. Emma, who, of course, is also played by Angela Lansbury, performs this song in the Season 2 episode, Sing a Song for Murder. It's really a delight to see and comes highly recommended by me. Dorian decides to propose marriage and make a love match for himself and God. Unfortunately, he has already dealt with the devil and only needs to take one action to seal that deal and her fate along with it. Taking a piece of advice that he got from Lord Henry, Dorian sets a purity trap for Sybil. He invites her to his home one evening, and then, when it is time for her to go, he asks her to stay. If she refuses, even under threat of the marriage being canceled, she is a lady. If she stays, then she is a disposable whore, and the marriage will be called off. Earlier, I referenced Donna Reed's role in this film as the kind of lady who is afforded the option to be a lady because of familial and societal support. Sybil is in no such position, so when Dorian's dirty deal is put to her, she chooses to stay, only wanting to please him because dignity is not something afforded to women who do not have the support of men. Not to say that purity is a real test of dignity, but in this story and on this young woman's face, it is plain to see that she did not want to stay, and only did so because she felt her ultimate role was to please him. Remember, Sybil is about to be his wife, which, if nothing else, means she is intended to be his property. This kind of reasoning, the kind that led her to stay, is the most natural thing in the world considering those realities. I wonder if we will ever stop blaming women for responding to the world we live in. Dorian does indeed rescind his marriage proposal. In response, Sybil kills herself. Driving a woman to destroy herself is an act of the devil, by way of the evil in men's hearts. Dorian quickly recovers from his grief and is spouting off sociopathic platitudes by breakfast. His sane friend, the artist named Basil, comes to check on Dorian, whom he fears is suffering under the grief of Sybil's loss, not to mention the guilt for being to blame for Sybil's suicide. He is shocked to find Dorian chipper and hungry. Dorian says a string of vile things when questioned about the loss. He says, "It is only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, enjoy them, and to dominate them." At this point, calling Dorian his friend is a mark against Basil's character. But because the artist was written as the all-knowing yet all-accepting fool of the story, likely as a reflection of the writer's view of himself or of art itself, we do not question his loyalty to Dorian, who at this point sounds like a cult leader. On that subject, he seems to bear an uncanny resemblance to a daguerreotype of Joseph Smith, Jr. of Mormon church fame, taken in 1843 and submitted to the Library of Congress in 1879, roughly 10 years before this story was published. In addition to looking like Mr. Smith, Dorian seems to share some of his philosophies about feelings, namely the idea that mastery over felt experience was not only a path to God, but also a product that could be peddled like a get-rich-quick scheme, or more aptly described as a brainwashing technique aimed at separating people from their souls and the vessel that keeps them safe. Mind over matter, or rather, mind over emotion, can have dangerous consequences for those who aim to separate themselves from the reality of how things feel. Imagine if you had already deferred your soul's suffering to paint and canvas. There is no hope for Dorian or his pathetic show of strength in front of his friend Basil, who knows in his heart what evil is behind this effort. By the way, I do not mean any offense to Mormon listeners at all, if I have any. I think Joseph Smith is a horrifying and cult-adjacent historical figure, but I am no way extending that judgment to current-day Mormons. I'm really not in a position to make such a judgment. There are many figures from the 1800s that benefited from twisting societal and interpersonal expectations into a game of manipulation and power. Victorian manners, almost by definition, had an aversion to shows of emotion, making it a very ripe time for small religious and occult groups to take a hold of people's hearts and minds. Removing yourself from your animal instinct isn't just good manners. It can separate you from your soul and self depending on the circumstance. This point, specifically the idea that heaven and hell are inside all men, is very much present throughout the book and film. It isn't lost on me that the societal circumstances and expectations during the Victorian era created a well-mannered monster in Dorian Gray. It's also worth noting the lines of connection between Dorian's devilish acts and addiction. Almost all of his ne'er-do-well activities include drinking, sex, and violence to oneself or others. Dorian's words, "I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, enjoy them, and dominate them," are hardly just old-fashioned or explained away by Victorian pressures run amok. Words like those Dorian uttered are lines delivered daily by idiots who wish to control themselves as much as others. Watch out for the well-mannered charmer, because he may drive you to suicide before he manages to destroy himself. The portrait struggles under the weight of his deferred humanity, becoming grotesque and sick after Sybil's death. Dorian hides the picture that has become the proof of his corrupted heart. He cements his shame when he can no longer face himself. Anything deferred creates sickness, which by definition is addiction. If one sells one's soul to the devil, he cannot escape having had one to begin with. One of Dorian's many narcissistic thoughts includes, "Is sincerity such a terrible thing?" He thinks not, but the man inside of him still yearns for the very thing he's living without. Something true. He has one honest thing in his life, and that is the now fully grown Gladys. Gladys loves him and has grown to be just as lovely as Sybil Vain was the night she took her own life. Gladys's advantage of status and preserved innocence protects her from her imminent self-destruction. One night, before a dance being held at Dorian's house, she stands in the study with her uncle Basil, talking nonchalantly about asking Dorian to marry her. The discussion takes place while she is waiting for her date to arrive. Basil seems to take it all as a childish crush that she still has not grown out of. His lack of interest in holding his friend to account has created the perfect conditions for his niece to be this naive and this vulnerable to a monster, proving that good men doing nothing is the same as bad men driving young girls to suicide. Gladys wears the proof of her status as the highest holy lamb on her way to the slaughter in her look and manner. She is wearing a Grecian-style white dress that scoops low and hugs tight around her bust, waist, and hips. It is adorned with leaves and vines fashioned in gold or silver filament, making her look like Athena or Eve entwined in some Garden of Eden greenery. Tulle sleeves fall past her shoulders, showing off her youth-kissed décolletage. Her hair is done up in an asymmetrical Gibson Girl Does pompadour look, with more wave than curl to it. She tops the look off with a lush white shawl adorned with black ermine tails, the fur of royalty in the color of darkness. Her innocent yet daring demeanor is a gift afforded her by family and station, although the former is faltering, but it's appearances that count. No one is calling her trash, as I dare say they said about the late Sybil Vain. Dorian refuses Gladys's marriage proposal, saying it would be cruel to marry her. Of course, he is right, but it is so sad to see how disposable Sybil was, and apparently a slew of other women around London who he has used and tossed away without a thought, but not precious Gladys. I guess the culture of asking for it is firmly at play for Dorian Gray. I will say that the fact that Gladys remains unscathed makes me loathe her, especially since the function of that protection is innocence itself. I guess Eve never ate the apple and the cat was never curious. Leading a dull life in service of men may keep you alive, but I am quite sure it leaves you as soulless as monsters like Dorian. Realizing that his niece is in potential danger, finally, Basil gets up the will to aright his backbone and talk to Dorian. He does so on a dense, foggy night before a trip to France. His luggage is already at the station, and he has the great misfortune of running into Dorian in the street after missing him at his home. They walk back to Dorian's and discuss the rumors going around about Dorian and the many friends of his who have fallen into great misfortune as a result of their association. Dorian appears to feel some level of relief at being called out or seen through for having some damage to his soul. He takes the ill-advised opportunity to show Basil his painting and, by extension, bare his soul to its artist. He takes Basil up to the tiny attic room that was once Dorian's schoolroom as a child, which now contains the proof of spiritual perversion, the painting. Upon seeing the work he made, Basil nearly falls to his knees. The image is grotesque and technicolored like an oil slick on the river Styx. The likeness of Dorian has taken on the hideous pallor of his broken soul. It oozes and undulates darkness, and at certain angles resembles the bog monster that lives behind Winky's in Mulholland Drive. Basil asks Dorian if he knows how to pray. Dorian refuses, like a child asked to eat his vegetables. While Basil prays, Dorian stabs him in the back, literally. he kills his friend, one of the few decent people who did not turn away from him. This is a lesson in why supporting abusers and monsters under the guise of non-judgment isn't just horrible behavior, it's also dangerous. I don't feel very sad about Basil. I blame him for doing nothing until there was nothing to do. Dorian covers the painting back up and leaves the room to arrange for the disposal of his friend's body. The business of disposal is just as wretched as the murder itself, involving blackmail, bloodied hands, alibis, and the like. But Dorian pulls it off quite easily and takes the opportunity to be the shoulder to lean on for the distraught Gladys, who assumes that her uncle Basil is simply missing. Dorian makes a show out of helping her look, and the two plan to wed. It seems his feelings of protection towards the young and innocent Gladys are removed the instant the threat of punishment by a male member of her family is gone. Isn't it funny how the only thing actually keeping women safe is being the property of another man, father, uncle, husband, or brother? Speaking of brothers, Sybil's is on the warpath to find Dorian Gray. Although he does not know his real name, he only knows the pet name his sister called him, Sir Tristan, because she saw him as a real old-fashioned, chivalrous gentleman. Sybil's father and mother had basically lost interest in her once she was no longer in service to them. But her brother, who may not have been of any notable status, was still a male family member who cared, making his feelings not only essential, but also consequential. When he finds Dorian, he does not believe it is the man he's after because he looks much too young. Once again, the deferred soul, the lie that he lives in, saves his life and ruins another's. There is a not-so-novel scene in which Dorian has decided to turn over a new leaf in an effort to be good enough for his good woman fiancé. This is one of the most damaging tropes for women. The idea that there are good and bad women. We are all women, only guilty of good or bad based on the freedom our circumstances allow. Circumstances that are molded by men and then supported by the patriarchy we all live in. No amount of taking it or offering grace will get a monster to be a man. But the mythos of the good woman continues to wreak havoc on the structures of blame between the sexes, creating those women who work in support of men and against each other, and those of us who are continually asking for it, as the saying goes. If it isn't plain to see, I am angry for being labeled the latter, the one that is always treated as disposable by the men who benefit from the grace givers and the ultra-innocent types. The women who come out in support of the man who abused you or misled you. He protects himself at the detriment of both. I covered what gaslighting is in my Gaslight episode. But at some point, I will be naming names just for my own peace of mind. But that day is not today. The subject shifts from Dorian's conveniently timed good intentions to his bride-to-be's missing uncle Basil. You know, the man Dorian literally stabbed in the back? He asks Lord Henry what he thinks happened to Basil. Lord Henry responds, "I haven't the slightest idea, but I suppose in a fortnight or so we shall be told that he is in San Francisco. Everyone who disappears is said to be seen in San Francisco. The Northern California city's lore delights me to no end. The bohemian reputation of the city where I spent the majority of my life seems to weave in and out of the cultural products that I find meaning in. This is just an aside I couldn't resist spotlighting." Back to the issues at hand. With Basil out of the way and his bride-to-be successfully snowed by the results of his deal with the devil, Dorian should be on cloud 9. But it is just at this critical juncture that his dreams start to be haunted by the conscience of the soul that he had assumed was locked away in paint and canvas. His would-be assassin, Sybil's brother, is accidentally shot on a group hunting day. This perfectly timed twist of fate protects the monster and kills the kind retribution coming for him. His secret is protected, but his soul overpowers his will, and he leaves his bride-to-be as an act of faith. He discerns a slight but meaningful difference in the portrait as a result and decides to live out his life in repentant seclusion. But first, he destroys the painting as an act of freedom from the devil's deal. And it does indeed free him. Finally, the heart that drove Sybil to suicide stops beating. His sickly soul re-enters his ruined body. The painting returns to the glory of his youth, and the curse is broken when he can no longer hurt anyone else. When the group walks in and witnesses the mangled and grotesque body of Dorian Gray, Lord Henry says, "God forgive me," proving that the casual but not necessarily authentic evil of Lord Henry had the same effect as if he had been the devil himself. Falsity proves to be the most disgusting sin of this story. This is not quite the retribution that Sybil's brother was after, but it is the best we get. The promise that Dorian is not able to ruin anyone else like he ruined that sweet songbird Sybil has to be enough for now, at least in this life. Thank you for listening to Window Dressing's Gothic romance series. The next episode in the series will be Rebecca. But some bonus episodes are coming your way too, so please be on the lookout for those. Please like, subscribe, rate, and comment on this podcast wherever you are listening, and follow me on Instagram at Window Dressing Podcast for more content. I also recently joined TikTok, so look for me there too. I'm Madeline Jane Auble.